Hello everyone, my name is Rachel. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am bringing you guys part 2 to a video that I released earlier this week, which was romances that I adore that I never talk about on my channel. I'm gonna link that up in the cards above. So today is going to be books of all other genres that aren't romance that I absolutely love, that I probably only talked about in one wrap-up, and then that was it. I haven't brought them up in any recommendation videos since then. First up is a middle grade graphic memoir, and this is Deafo by Cece Bell. This is a graphic novel, and it is a memoir about Cece and how when she was about 4 years old, she had an illness that caused her to become deaf. And so we see her coming to terms with that and learning to live and adapt with that disability. And she comes up with this adorable alter ego known as Deafo, Listener for All, where she imagines herself as a superhero because she gets these hearing implants or hearing aids put in her ears, and she sees herself as having superhuman hearing now because of them. It's so adorable. I also learned a lot about the deaf community in this book and how to interact with deaf people and the spectrum of deafness and all of those things. I just think it's a fantastic book. Even though it's technically a middle grade book, I think that anybody would enjoy this and learn a lot from it. It's just absolutely fantastic. Next up is a book that I can't say I necessarily had a fun time with while reading it. It's more of a book that just lives in my head rent-free, and that is Dry by Neil Shusterman and Jared Shusterman, which is Neil's son. So this is essentially a disaster or natural disaster story. So this is essentially a natural disaster story. This takes place in California, where one day the taps run dry and there is no water, or at least no drinkable water, to be had. And so things quickly spiral out of control. From the very first page with this book, I was immediately immersed into the atmosphere and into this very terrifying situation that all of these characters were put into. As someone like myself, I'm from Southeast Louisiana. I've been through quite a few hurricanes, hurricane evacuations, things like that. Especially Hurricane Katrina comes to mind, especially when I was reading this book, because there are situations, especially with the lack of resources going on in the story, that felt very real to me because that was very much a huge problem in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. So if you are in the mood for a disaster story like this, I would wholeheartedly recommend it, but maybe for the current times that we're living in, this isn't the best book to go with. But I do think that it was very well written and it just felt very real. Next up, I quickly wanted to bring up 2 books by the same author that I absolutely adored. The first one is Allegedly, and then Monday's Not Coming, both by Tiffany D. Jackson. So Tiffany D. Jackson writes YA thrillers. In my opinion, she's one of the few authors that does that so well. I feel like most YA thrillers, I don't know, are just annoying or like not believable. I don't know. I'm not really attracted to that subgenre, but these books were absolutely fantastic. They're 2 very different stories. This one is about Mary B. Addison, who allegedly killed a baby, and she was put into a juvenile detention center. Now she lives in a home for teenage girls that were convicted of heinous crimes, essentially. And then Monday's Not Coming is about our main character, Claudia. She has a best friend named Monday, who is a young black girl. Monday goes missing. She just doesn't show up to school, and it seems that Claudia is the only person who's actually concerned about her and her well-being. So both of these books definitely bring up very real issues in our society, such as with Monday's Not Coming, the issue of black girls going missing and the press not covering them nearly as much as they cover white people that go missing, for instance. Just absolutely fantastic writing. I cannot wait to read more from her. Next up is a fantastic novella by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is Evidence of the Affair. It's essentially told in a series of letters, but we have our main characters, Carrie and David. Carrie writes a letter to David to let him know that their spouses are having an affair with each other behind their backs. And so things go on from there, and they develop a beautiful friendship and maybe something more through letters. This is a very short novella, but boy, did it pack a punch. The ending in particular really got me. Just absolutely fantastic, and it's not a novella that I hear nearly enough people talking about, even though Taylor Jenkins Reid is such a popular author. Next up, we have a horror novel recommendation. This is Mallory by Josh Malerman. So this is the sequel to the very popular Bird Box, which is both a novel and a Netflix movie. If you don't know, the basic premise of that first book was that we have our main character Mallory, and everything just goes to hell because there is this being or this entity that if you look at it, it will make you go insane and you will end up killing yourself. So now we have Mallory, the sequel to Bird Box. And this was a sequel that I don't think anybody asked for. I know I didn't ask for it. And going into it, I wasn't expecting too much out of it. I thought maybe I would give it like a solid 4-star, but it pleasantly surprised me. First of all, if you're worried that this is just going to be some kind of remake of the first book, rest assured that it's not. It's a completely original story with new things to be scared about. I'll end it at that. It was also really cool to see Tom and Olympia, who were little children. They were 4 years old in the first book. Now, I think they're about 16 years old. And then once again, it was fascinating to be in Mallory's mind. I personally loved the direction this went in. The ending was really interesting, and I liked that it was a hopeful ending. This is just one of the very few cases that, even though a sequel wasn't all that much needed, I thought it was very well done. Next up, we have a stunning YA LGBTQ+ story. So this is Felix Ever After by Case and Calendar. So this is about a trans boy named Felix. He goes to an art school. Specifically, this is a summer program, and someone starts blackmailing him and posting pictures of him before his transition, and I think posts his dead name as well. And so he comes up with this plan for revenge and for finding out who this person is. There's also a really beautiful romance between him and his friend Ezra. It's just such a stunning story. There is a scene at the end where they're all at a pride parade that made me tear up because it was just so beautifully written, and you could see that Felix finally felt like he was in a place where he belonged. Next up, I quickly want to mention Concrete Rose by Angie Thomas. I read this book back in February. This is the prequel to The Hate U Give, and it was just absolutely incredible. Maverick was a character that I really loved in The Hate U Give, but at the time I didn't know that he was going to get his own book. So when this book was announced, I was pumped for sure. This book feels so unique to me because it's about a young black teen who becomes a father at way too young of an age. Most books about this kind of story, you're following the mother and not the father. And Maverick is just such a fantastic character. It was also really cool to see other characters that are featured in The Hate U Give way back when they were all teenagers. Next up, we have The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. This is a book that the more time I've had away from it, the more that I love it, which is very interesting. Because at the time I think I gave it like 4.5 stars, but upon reflection, I think it's truly a 5-star book. It's absolutely genius. So this is a story about these 4 Indigenous men. We see them when they're teenagers, so about 10 years before the real plot starts. And we see them hunting elk, I want to say, yes, elk. And they end up killing a female elk who was pregnant. And so something essentially happens where the spirit of this female elk is, I guess, activated, you could say, 10 years later. And now she is hell-bent on revenge against these 4 men that killed her. It is just geniusly written. There are passages where it's told from the entity's POV and it's told in second person as if like the reader is the entity, and I thought that was so freaking cool. There's just fantastic discussions about Native or Indigenous life and community and all of that. I highly recommend checking out reviews from Indigenous readers. I'm actually going to link a video down below that Brody did. He did a live show discussion about The Only Good Indians, I believe. Either he did it or Kayla from Books and Lala did it, but he brought up some fantastic points because he himself is Indigenous. and it made me love the book even more. So highly, highly recommend checking out that discussion. I will say there are spoilers in that video, so definitely read the book first before checking it out. I definitely need to read more from Stephen Graham Jones because I can tell that he brings something very different to the horror genre. Next up, we have a book that I really didn't know what I was getting myself into when I started it, but it absolutely blew me away. And that is Eleanor, Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. This is a literary fiction novel, definitely much more character driven than anything else, about our main character, Eleanor Oliphant, who is one of the most interesting and complex main characters that I've ever followed. I do want to say content warning for physical and emotional abuse, as well as sexual assault and a suicide. There's some very dark things going on in this book. You wouldn't know that looking at the cover, but I wanted to bring that up just in case. But Eleanor's journey in this book is quite the roller coaster, but it's also just so beautifully done and well written, and I thought the ending was absolutely perfect. I also loved this beautiful friendship that she formed with Raymond, who was one of the other prominent characters. Next up, we have one of the best historical fiction novels that I've ever read, which is The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. This is a book that you've all probably heard about, and probably most of you have read at this point. But just to tell you a little bit of what it's about these two sisters during World War II. One of the sisters is living in a small town, I want to say in France, that is slowly but surely getting taken over by Nazis. And then we have the other sister who ends up helping fighter pilots that are either from the US or the UK that end up crash landing in German territory. And so she helps them get out before the Nazis can catch them. It's absolutely phenomenal. It's just as amazing as everybody says. I cried at the end because there's a beautiful reunion between two of the characters. I'm not going to say who because you just need to read it. It's just so well done. This is one of those historical fiction books that reminds me that I need to read more from the genre, because it's not a genre that I'm the most attracted to, because it has been hit or miss for me, but there are some amazing gems in there for sure. Next up, we have a pretty popular book at this point. This is Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng. This is another literary fiction novel. This is also a Hulu series, which I haven't watched yet. What is wrong with me? I don't know. But this is about a couple of different families in Shaker Heights, which is a suburb of Cleveland. We have Mia Warren, who is an artist. She's a single mother. She ends up moving into this small town, and she moves into this small house with her daughter, and the owners of that house are a very wealthy white family that lives in a neighborhood nearby. And so the two families end up getting intertwined in very interesting ways. Lots of drama, lots of tea. There's also a plot line about this white family that adopts an Asian baby who was quote unquote abandoned by the mother, but that's not really the case. So things get really messy in terms of that as well. Beautifully, beautifully done. Really kept me on the edge of my seat the entire time. I couldn't wait to see what tea was going to be spilled next. Last but certainly not least is a fantastic book by one of my favorite YA authors. This is The Boy in the Black Suit by Jason Reynolds. I don't know why more people haven't read this yet, because I know that a lot of people have read Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds, but for some reason, this book has kind of fallen under the radar, and it's everything. Okay, so this is about our main character, Matt. His mother passes away, I believe, from cancer. And so he's definitely dealing with a lot of grief for sure. He ends up starting to work at a funeral home for this guy, Mr. Ray, who is just a fantastic side character. I loved his character so much. So because Matt works for this funeral home, he ends up starting to attend these funerals. He just stands in the back very respectfully. He doesn't talk to anybody. He's definitely kind of an invisible presence there. And he realizes that through attending the funerals of people that he doesn't know, it's oddly enough a very healing experience for him. It's just so beautiful to read about Matt and his healing journey. I feel like Jason Reynolds perfectly portrayed all of the different stages of grief. I think if you're someone that is dealing with the loss of a loved one, I think that you would get a lot out of this book. And I don't know, I just think that this book could really help with your healing process. So I can't recommend this highly enough. Really fantastic characters as well. Yeah, I don't know what else to say, but it's easily one of the best hard-hitting YA contemporaries that I've ever read. Alright guys, that's going to be it for books that I absolutely love that I never talk about on this channel. I would love it if you would leave a comment down below if you want to discuss any of the books that I brought up in this video. I would also love it if you would leave a like and subscribe, and I thank you in advance if you do. And with that being said, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!